All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming to our webinar today. Um, really much appreciated. I know everyone's busy. In order to take some time out of your day, it's a big thing, but we appreciate it. My name's Mike Balashi, and I am an independent contractor. I work with several insurtech companies, and I help them bring their business and tools, their wares, their software, their subscriptions, whatever they have, into the marketplace, bring in new clients, bring in new revenues, things like that. Refocus AI is one of my clients, and Colby is the CEO and co-founder of that company. I think they have an incredible service solution tool that really anyone in the business would want to take advantage of. Their artificial intelligence identifies clients that are about to leave, giving you the benefit of disrupting that, and it lets you know about the leave 2 to 3, 4 months prior to them leaving. I know it sounds too good to be true and magical, but it really is. And the rate of accuracy is like 94%, and clients typically get a 20 to 25% increase in retention. Now, we all know retention is a lot cheaper than bringing in new business. Both are very important, but this gives you a way to attack the retention problem at a very low cost and a very high rate of return. Before I get into, I do want to mention, I did send everybody a demo to try this for free via LinkedIn. It's very simple. We have an email gateway. There's no integration required. You basically send the CSV file that I sent you into the gateway email. The results come back in a couple of minutes, and that's what we're going to go over today, the details behind the results, and you'll see how pretty cool this is. Before I intro Colby, who's already introed, I'd like to go over a few ground rules. This webinar will be recorded and we'll make it available on demand. If you could please keep your cameras and microphones off for the duration of the webinar, that'd be great. We all know what a problem feedback and background noise does. And you'll have questions. Feel free to use the chat, and we will do our best to get them all answered today. And don't forget, try the demo. So on that note, I'd like to introduce Colby, turn it over to him. As I said, he's the CEO and co-founder of Refocus AI, and he's the man behind the curtain. He's gonna tell us how this works, the whys, and we'll see what you think. Go ahead, Colby.
Hi, thank you so much for that generous introduction. I don't know if I'm actually, the wizard in the Wizard of Oz. I would say that's probably our other co-founder, Dr. Nassar Hundawal, who is fortunate to be on our team, is probably one of the top 10 machine learning experts in the United States at this very moment, having done similar retention work for companies like Walmart, Comcast, Johnson & Johnson, Nielsen's, and others like them. And now we're excited to really bring that to the insurance industry, an industry that I really love. I don't think you'll find a group of people that are any kinder or any more willing to help out. So thank you for that introduction, Mike. Prior to starting Refocus AI and prior to working in the insurance industry, I was an international defense consultant working with both private organizations as well as government innovation units, helping them modernize through cutting edge software. And so that's ultimately how we brought our love of machine learning into the insurance industry. And that's why today we're going to talk about how to increase your retention. Before we dive in, though, there's really two things I want to just highlight. And the first is that many of the companies that are using our product today have already a high retention rate, some of them as high as 96 to 98%. And you may wonder why companies who have such a high retention rate above the industry average would want to work with a company like us. And the reason for that is right now, the economy is flush with cash and things are going really well in general for most independent policyholders, the families, and then businesses as well. And when we're taking a look ahead and when our users, our customers are taking a look ahead 2 to 3 years, they see inflation as well as other factors increasing the difficulty at policies expiration date and retaining those customers. And so many of them have proactively chosen to work with us in order to get a handle on their retention now so that they can outcompete the field when market conditions continue to harden. And the second thing I wanted to mention before we begin is we've been fortunate enough now to work with some of the largest brokers and mutual carriers in the United States. And because of that, we've had the privilege of looking at millions of anonymized policies. And so some of the insights I'm going to share today comes from that research. And so because we've had the ability to look at that data, such a large amount of data at scale, we've been able to tease out some trends that we're going to cover and that I'm looking forward to sharing with you. So today we're going to cover the 3 most common retention myths that we encounter, that I encounter. We're going to talk about ultimately why we're still talking about retention. You'd think in this day and age we'd have a better solution to it. We're going to talk about why knowing about someone's likelihood to churn at their expiration date or at renewals is extremely powerful, and then how to win at retention, especially when we think about where the market will be in 2 to 3 years. So we encounter 3 common retention myths, and the first one is that price or premium is directly correlated to churn. And what we found in looking through hundreds of thousands, if not millions of policies, is that price is actually not directly correlated to churn. And the logic goes that as someone's premium increases, so too does their likelihood to churn at renewals. But what we found is that most of the time, the premium is increasing due to a factor that's in the policyholder's direct control. So this can be an expensive workers' comp claim, this can be a car accident, the full gamut of property and casualty, personal and commercial lines. And because of this expected increase, when they see the premium go up at the renewals, that's actually not a signal for them to go and try and shop elsewhere. Using a personal example, my grandparents had a busted pipe in their house and had an $80,000 insurance claim not so long ago. Now, they know their premium is going to go up. And they also know that if they switch somewhere else, or try to shop around, if you will, their premium might be even more than if they just renew at the higher amount with their current carrier. And so what this means for you is that if you're prioritizing your renewal efforts right now based on the customers with the most significant premium increases, you may actually be missing customers who need your help or want that attention or who would otherwise renew anyway. The second myth that we encounter is the golden ratios of policy to policyholders is 3 or greater. And it's like 2.8, but you can't sell an eighth of a policy, right? So that's why we say 3. Now, if you've ever seen the Snopes fact checking when they say it's true, kind of false, false, this falls under the kind of false category. And the reason it's kind of false is because right now, as an industry, when we think of why having 3 or more policies as being key to a policyholder to retain, it's because of the inconvenience to them to leave. And we see that friction as critical to retaining them come their subsequent renewal. However, what we have to start thinking about is as technology continues to advance and as moving becomes ever more streamlined, that friction is lessening every day. And as friction lessens, as soon as it's less painful for them to go elsewhere than it is to stay, those customers who are unhappy are going to churn. And so when we're looking at the golden ratio, maybe it's a good stand-in for Net Promoter Score, how likely they are to recommend you to someone else, but it's not necessarily an indication of how likely they are to stay, because you don't know in that person's life at that moment in time, or that company's life in that moment in time, if it's actually now more convenient for them to deal with the short-term pain of going somewhere else than it is to stay. And then lastly, something that we thought was a truism and was really, what kind of blew us away to discover, was account rounding at renewals is optimal. And that's the myth that we hear. We hear that, we have our best account rounding at the time the policy is expiring, we're reaching out to the customer anyway, and we're offering them additional products and services, and they're buying it. And after looking at billions of data points and seeing the different outreach and the marketing that was sent and all of that, what we found is that 1 month before and 1 month after the expiration date is the least statistical likelihood to successfully account round. And when we dug into this a little bit, because that was exciting to us to find that, what we discovered is on a buyer psychology level, renewal dates are stressful for people. For a lot of folks who pay their premium up front, they've saved up for that entire policy cycle in order to pay their next premium, and they have no surplus cash. Or for businesses, they did their yearly budget, they were expecting a certain amount of premium, and so that was fixed in their budget. And because of that, if you approach them with a greater cost at renewals, they're less likely to go for it. They're less likely to be receptive for it. So selling or account rounding additional policies and services a month before or after that renewal date is actually the time you're most likely to be successful. And ultimately, what this just goes to show is that when we look at the data, when it comes to renewals, things aren't necessarily always as they seem. So why are we still talking about retention? Why are we here? You would think by now, as an insurance industry, we would have figured this out. And it's not an easy nut to crack. And figuring out why it has historically been as difficult as it is requires us stepping back in time and remembering when we purchased most of our goods and services, insurance included, through a trusted intermediary that we had a personal relationship with. And if you think about retention in that context, it's extremely difficult to tell your sister-in-law, your brother, your best friend, your next door neighbor that, hey, I'm not going to renew my insurance with you, even though I've had that policy with you for 15 years. I'm actually going to go with the guy I met at the grocery store. And because of that tight relationship, the personal relationship between the customer and the person selling them the product, retention wasn't nearly as difficult as it is now. And where we're at today, even if you have a good rapport with your customers, is most buyers, most insureds, whether they be an individual in their personal capacity or a business in a commercial capacity, view insurance as a transactional relationship, and they view you as an extension of the insurance company, but not one that they have a trusted relationship with per se. And of course, there's always the outliers, but what we've seen looking at the data that we've had access to is that it's more in this situation, the outlier is the exception that proves the rule. The other thing to remember here is that we often do not correctly understand where we fit within an insured's sphere of influence. So before I showed you just a quick diagram of how we used to have a personal relationship with the insured, meaning we were literally in their intimate family and friends or extended social network circle. But what we've seen is that after about 10 million in premium or 10 employees, it's not possible anymore to have an individual one-on-one relationship. And then if you look at why that is, it's because when you sold, let's say you're an independent agency and you sell your first policy, well, now you have one policy holder for all of the time that you have in a day. But once you sell to 10 policyholders, 10 insureds, now you have to split that same amount of time 10 ways. And after your 100th client, now you're splitting that 100 ways. And what happens is after those initial transactions, we're no longer selling to people that are in our intimate family and friends circle or our extended social network. We're actually selling to our professional network or the everyone else category. And because of that lack of personal relationship, retention is extremely difficult. Now, the other factor here at play, what we like to call the Maslow's hierarchy of customer retention, is that most companies compete because of this lack of personal relationship in the service tier. About 85% of insurance companies are here. If you want to think of a non-insurance example of companies that compete in the service tier, think about the grocery store. Most consumers will shop at 3 to 4, some even more grocery stores just based on selection and price. And they don't really care where they buy their groceries as long as they feel like they're getting the best deal. And as you can imagine, that's why it's so hard to retain customers that are in the service tier when you're only competing on price and general customer service alone. And where we need to be is a personal relationship where customers seek us out and proactively want to retain themselves. And if we want to wrap that all up, what that means is we must offer individualized personal service at renewals to those who need it. So how do we take a relationship-centric approach to retention? We do this by understanding which policyholders are most likely to churn so that we can allocate them the time and attention. And as I showed earlier on the myths, just because someone's premium is going up doesn't necessarily mean we have to worry about them churning. Conversely, just because someone has 5 policies doesn't mean it's not worth talking to them come retention time or going beyond just a quick screening call, sending them an automated email. So we're not naive, and we know that a certain amount of customers are going to churn regardless of what we do. And so what matters is trying to prioritize limited time and resources on the customers who are likely to be most responsive. And if you think about where we're at right now, the only way you know someone will leave is after they do. Most of the time, you don't have an indication that they're going to churn ahead of time until you get their cancellation notice or that phone call. And I read something the other day, it was something along the lines of 15% of customers who leave actually had a problem they didn't want to tell you about. And so if you think about it, it's identifying when there's a need to have that advanced personal interaction when you only have so much staff time and resources. And so out of everyone who's going to leave, if you take 100% of your customers who are likely to leave, right? So let's say you have 90% retention rate. So this would be the 10% churn that you experience every year. 50% of those customers are not likely to be responsive to retention efforts. And so it's probably not worth spending much staff time and resources on that 50%, because if they're not going to be responsive, you're losing out on potentially retaining those that are. The next group of people may be likely to retain if you spend staff time and resources on them. And then the last group, the 20%, are very likely to be highly responsive to retention efforts. And this is the group that ultimately Refocus AI helps you focus on, because out of all the customers that are going to retain or that are coming up for renewals, you have to quickly determine and synthesize all of those folks down into, here are the people that are likely to churn. We want to renew their business. They're highly profitable. We obviously want to retain them, and we think they're going to be responsive. And then you just work down from the most likely to leave to the least likely to leave for those folks. Now, that's what it looks like ahead once we have some sort of predictive analytics in place. But imagine what it's like right now for just an account executive or agent or broker on your staff. Because they don't have the benefit of predictive analytics, you have to treat every customer the same at renewals, which just isn't effective, and it's also not a great use of time or resources. Now, imagine then for those folks what it would mean if you could generate a list of your most profitable accounts who are likely to churn and work from most likely to retain to least likely. That would be much more effective and profitable. And ultimately, that's what Refocus AI does for you. Now, we always get questions about how does this work? And I don't want to get into the sausage making, but all of our insights are 100% dependent on your book of business. And so we use your book of business report, your Bob report, to train a series of machine learning models that we then use to forecast future retention. And if you want to think about this in a more generic way, it's about building affinity groups or personas or customer archetypes. So looking across the 10, 20, hundreds of fields of data that you have in your book of business and saying, based on those data points and people that have either stayed or left in the past, what do we think that this specific insured who's coming up for renewal is going to do? Are they going to churn? Are they going to stay? And what's our confidence for either one of those two scenarios? And then what our businesses, our customers have been able to do to date is reduce their churn by up to 25%, boosting both the revenue and loyalty. In insurance, we know it's extremely expensive to acquire a new customer, anywhere from 5 to 25 times more expensive if you want to put a percentage on it. A dollar amount, though, right now for an independent agent in the United States, it's about $900 in customer acquisition cost per customer. And so retaining customers has to be a focus, but only 40% of agency owners, principals, C-level staff at larger carriers say that retaining customers is actually a priority. 60% indicate acquiring new customers is a priority. So we worked with Brown & Brown. They were actually our first customer. And where we've seen most of our success to date working with customers is in small to mid personal and commercial property and casualty. We've also done some light work in the employee benefits space. We've proven that it works in the life and health space, but we currently don't have any commercial deployments specific to those lines of business. And across all of the data we've seen, 85 to 90% is an industry average. Right now, many people are seeing higher than industry average because of the great economic conditions, but we expect those to return to, the industry baseline of 85 to 90% in the next 2 to 3 years. Ultimately, the Brown & Brown office we worked with was facing a shortage of time and resources. They didn't have a way to know before someone left if they would leave. They only found out at cancellation. And they didn't have a great agency management system in place to begin with. So they were literally divining, through what they thought were proper indicators of someone's likelihood to churn as a way to order their renewals at work, their renewals desk. And it wasn't an effective way. And so what we did was within 6 months, we were able to improve their retention by 25% through curating a list of leads for targeted outreach. When I say leads, I mean, existing customers that need that extra time and attention, who you want to retain anyway, and through no fault of your own, may be unhappy and leave unless you spend just a little bit of time retaining them. And that's just prioritized by confidence so that we know exactly how likely someone is to leave. Now, for Brown & Brown, we were 93% accurate. So that means 93 out of 100 customers were correctly classified if they were going to churn, which is pretty good. And we're always working on trying to capture that additional percentage. For our one big deployment right now, or one large customer, they're a mutual carrier. They write in 9 states, and they're mostly small and mid personal and commercial property and casualty. We're 98.22% accurate, which means we're classifying correctly 98 out of 100 people. And if you ask why the discrepancy, like I mentioned earlier, it's 100% based on your data. But for both of these customers, we've been able to increase the revenue their premium renewal by 25%. So that's been the advantage that they've seen. What does this look like though in the future? So most companies to date aren't gathering the right information to be prescriptive. So because your leaders and thinking about the future and what that means for your business, I hope you walk away from this if with nothing else than these 2 points. If you're not already, you should configure your agency management system to collect a cancellation and a renewal reason, either or. And don't let your account managers, your brokers, your agents get out of entering that information. Make it a required field. And the reason is with that information, we get into prescriptive analytics, which is the next evolution. 80% of the effort is just knowing if someone's going to leave. And that was the title of last slide. The next 20% is prescribing a specific action for your staff to follow based on your data. And with that information, you can actually get above a 25% boost in retention. And so having those 2 fields in your AMS lets us do 3 really exciting things. It lets us know when exactly a policyholder is most likely to churn. Not everybody churns on their renewal date. It lets us know why are they going to churn or not renew. So that's that cancellation reason. Why did they cancel? Did they get a better price elsewhere? Did they sell the property and no longer need insurance on it? What's the reason? Because that means for future customers, we're now able to predict that. And then lastly, what can be done to retain their business? So knowing the renewal reason is key in order to recommending a renewal action for customers that are likely to churn. Now, I mentioned that even without gathering these 2 fields in your agency management system, you can still increase your retention by up to 25%, which is fantastic. But if you want to get beyond that, and if you really want to stand out from the rest of your competition, gathering these 2 fields is absolutely crucial. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to retroactively do it. It can be as simple as from here on out, we're going to gather this information. And then within just 6 months, you'll actually have a significant moat of data competitive advantage because you have those 2 fields of data, and hopefully an analytics solution lets you utilize that at renewals to predict retention. And that's the end of my short presentation today. I'm going to see, Mike, if we have any questions, and we can go from there. Oh, there's your camera.
I just had to unmute myself. You can hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. I did have a question for you. I don't see any in the chat room. I'd love to hear from our attendees. But Corey, are you able to show a result of the of what we give our clients, what they get when they send us a file?
Yeah, so I can actually
Walk
share
through it.
what I just ran earlier on a call earlier this morning. So forgive the cluttered inbox. So essentially, what you get through the email gateway is an email that looks something like this. And so this is an example of a book of business export. As you can see, if we want to get a little bit more technical, there's no PII in here. There's a policy holder number, a unique identifier that you can use to reference back to your agency management system, but nothing other than that. And obviously, not everyone is going to have these fields. Some of you are going to have more, and we'll use whatever data you already have in your agency management system. But using this book of business export, we were able to generate a list of folks that are coming up on their renewals that are likely to leave. And so the way that most of our users work is they send us that book of business report. We then send them back this file, and then they just sort it in Excel. And they say, okay, let's see this customer. It looks like they're likely to churn at renewals, and we're 81% confident that they're going to do that. And at the same time, we're also able to give some account rounding insights. Maybe that'll factor in to the renewals conversation, but we can see this is actually a profitable customer, so we want to retain them. Let's make sure we're reaching out to this unique identifier, this policy holder, because we want to earn their business. And then these other customers that are not likely to churn, we don't need to worry about it. And that's ultimately what we give back. What you do with this is one of two things. You either work off this spreadsheet, and anyone with a basic understanding of Excel can then send calls and emails based on it, or they can actually upload it back into their agency management system utilizing custom properties. So now there's actually a record and a history on that person's profile in the agency management system. And then, we don't normally do this right off the bat because it's not worthwhile for our customers, but we also have an API for more substantial integrations where there needs to be more of a real-time flow of data. And I haven't mentioned it, but the question we always get next is, well, what does it cost? It costs nothing to start. And what do I mean by that? So we train our machine learning models to predict your retention based on your book of business data alone. We don't mix data from different customers. We don't have some random third-party augmentation solution that we're mixing in unless you ask us to specifically because you'd like to add data. And sometimes, for instance, we'll have people want to add marital status or socioeconomic status for renewals purposes, just so that they're able to have that information for their core market. But training those models, we do that complimentary. We need to do that anyway before we can even predict insights. And then after that, it's $1 per policy. So that's it. If you never use it, there's nothing to pay, and you only pay for what you do use. And that's because we genuinely believe, and it's something that I try and make a point of indoctrinating our team with, I think Mike can attest to that, is we want to be a partner to your business's success. And so if we help you be successful, you'll run more retention insights. And if you're not, then obviously we didn't do our job and we don't deserve to be rewarded. And so because of that, it's 100% usage based. So $1 per policy holder or policy that you run through our system, but your models are there for you to use whenever you need to. Does that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah, it does. I got a question. Is there a you may have already answered this, but I'm going to read it anyway. Is there a possibility of a direct integration to review the not in export? And then the other question was inside of the AMS.
Sure. So that would be an API integration. We have a standard RESTful API. It's really not difficult to work with, but what we found is that most insurance companies are not set up to do an API integrations, and most and to be quite frank, most agency management systems don't really encourage third-party API connections, but there are certain vendors that do have an open API that we can connect to. We prefer, just from a make everyone's life easier standpoint, an API integration makes it so that you're not manually taking data out of your agency management system, sending it off to our email, getting it back, and importing it, even though that process only takes about 10 minutes. So that was the long answer. The short answer is yes, we do actually have active integrations. One of them is with a company called Jetfile. We have an integration with Hawksoft, but that's on an individual basis. We're not a Hawksoft partner. We get the API from our specific Hawksoft client. And there's a couple other systems too, QQ Catalyst, AMS 360 we can integrate with. So we do have direct integrations so that we can review the book of business in the native system without doing an export.
Colby, in terms of the data that we need from the client, are there minimum amounts? Is there a cap? Can you send as much as you'd like?
Yeah, so we have a file that I'm sure, Mike, you can send to people that are interested. It's our required versus recommended data field. We only need 5 data points to start. So a unique identifier for the policyholder, right? We don't need names, nothing crazy like that. We need to know the line of business they've purchased. If they're a commercial client, then we need to know the NISCS number, and then premium and expiration date. And with those 5 data points, we can get started. However, the rule with machine learning is always the more data, the better. And the benefit of that is our machine learning will actually identify the most relevant data points for predicting retention based on the fields in your current book of business. And so if nothing else, 5 to start, more later, but what we always recommend is just do a general Bob report export to us so that we can stand up machine learning models that are extremely relevant and accurate for a specific business.
Great, thank you. Is there an optimum time of year or how many times a year we should run this?
Sure, yeah, I think that's a fair question. It depends on how the business is set up. And what I mean by that is some folks only want to know how likely the account is to renew when they're coming up on renewals. And so we're able to actually predict retention with above 90% accuracy up to 6 months in advance. It is potential to predict out farther than that, but there's really not a great, there's not a lot of benefit to doing that because things can occur closer to the renewal date that may supersede that initial score. But anywhere from 6 months to a week before the policyholder, we can provide accurate insights. Now, when it comes to what makes sense for most businesses will run it between 2 and 3 months before the renewal date, because they want to factor in what their staff's workload is going to be like. And if they know for a specific month, for whatever reason, 3 months from now, they're going to have a higher renewal workload, they will budget their staff's time accordingly. We also have customers who are running it twice a year. They want to know 6 months in advance so that they can forecast their budget and their revenue for next year. And then we also have, and then 3 months in advance so that they then have that actionable information I talked about earlier. One thing we found that may be interesting to people on this call is that the renewal premium has no correlation to someone's likelihood to churn. So you don't need to wait until you know that person's renewal premium in order to take advantage of these insights.
That's good to know. Great.
Yeah.
I think that's all we have. If anyone else has one, feel free to send it via chat, but looks like we might wrap up.
Absolutely. Well, my contact information, there it is right there, Colby@refocusi.com. Obviously, everyone here knows Mike. We love Mike. Everyone needs to have a Bostonian on their team named Mike. And I recommend you get one if you don't have one yet. So
Park the car, Colby.
I hear Bostonians get really nasty over car spots in the winter. Like if you shovel out a spot and someone steals it.
Don't move our garbage can.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. So, well, thank you very much, Colby. That was great. My own opinion is I think this tool is incredible. I think it's worth trying. I did send you a demo. If you need that again, let me know, and you'll see the results and go through it, and you can send along any questions. We can explain the results in a little more detail. But thank you all again for attending. Much appreciated, and we'll be following up. And obviously, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us. Right? Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Good weekend.